Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and HSA members, both local and interstate, and via Zoom, of course. Also members of the RAAF Heritage and History Division. It's good to have you on board. And we're very privileged, in fact, to have Ashley Briggs here tonight, Ashley Briggs AOM, as a well-deserved award for the work that he's put in both the museum and other places as well. So, Ashley, I'd welcome you to the stand here, and Dave's just given you the mic, I believe.
Well, it's rather bizarre talking about the foundation of the museum here, of course, seeing that the museum actually originated from the members within this group, some here, some still no longer with us, and one of the pioneers sitting up the back playing with his pen.
One of the artifacts.
Yes, national treasure. Anyway, but as you know, the Moorabbin Air Museum, the Australian Aircraft Restoration Group, of course, originated from a number of members from the Aviation Historical Society. Now, if I slip and call it the Hysterical Society, my apologies, but it's just habit. Anyway, who came about because, of course, Dick Hourigan was down at Portsea taking tracings off the markings of that aeroplane when he was informed that the aeroplane was due to be scrapped. And that was basically the initial premise behind saving that, because at the time it was thought that that was the last surviving Beaufighter in the world at the time. And even though the very first meeting, which I took a photo of the minutes today so I could get my dates right, took place actually in Hopton's mother's lounge room on the 13th of the 3rd in 1962. Prior to that, there was discussions around Nelson's table up at Wandon, etc. But the makeup of the very first committee was Nelson was actually the very first museum president, followed by the secretary was Michael Hill, Craig Atkins, who I've never ever met or even heard of, and the committee was Alan Carter, Dick Hourigan, and John Hopton. Of course, those names are well known. And from there, of course, they formed the ARG. They made the approach. They were given the aeroplane, even though they had nowhere to put it. So initially, the aeroplane went to Wandon, which was Nelson's nursery up at Wandon North. And most of the ARG's aeroplanes were stored up there for a number of years until 1965, when the Department of Transport or Aviation, whatever they were called that week, granted the museum, I think it was 150 by 150 foot. Does that sound familiar? It was a small area, literally on the current site where it is today, of course. And there's been expansions from there. Well, I think you were there, weren't you, Neil, picking up 10?
Probably, yeah.
Hopton bought 10 for all of 10 quid, and we've still got the receipt in the ARG's files. And at the time, John told me later on that they went around all the surviving aeroplanes there, and that was the oldest one they could find. And hence, that's why they chose 10. And it's managed to survive to this day in various states of disrepair over the years, of course, being stuck out in the open. The Mustang, of course, most people know the story of the Mustang. It was bought by 3 of the ARG members. One share went to the ARG. That was Hopton trading in what the museum owed him for paying for the fences, the Wirraway, and his share of the Mustang in exchange for a life membership. The other 2 shares were owned by Alan Carter and Dick Hourigan. Dick ended up buying out Alan's share, which gave him controlling interest, and he removed the aeroplane and took it up to Mildura. And of course, now it flies in the care of duty pay. So, but the ARG, during in the last few years, of course, the members banded together. We raised $250,000 and we managed to purchase 71, which was the ex Western Australia Museum Mustang, A6871. So we have technically the oldest Mustang surviving in this country, and a CA17. So we've managed to fill that hole. So the aeroplanes have both gone to good homes. What's next? Oh yeah, Cubana. Of course, the museum, after forming primarily formed the museum because as they were acquiring aeroplanes, of course, all the members were basically broke by putting in a few pennies each time to pay for these things, and they were struggling. So forming the museum, after no hope of or interest from the government, of course, in forming this, they opened at Moorabbin. And actually, I've got the date here too, because I found that in these notes as well. It was actually, hang on, just find the exact date because it's written in Hopton's writing. May the 23rd actually was 1965 was the official opening of the museum, because I asked Neil a while ago and he couldn't remember, as you could imagine. Can't remember what goes on. And so I found it in in the museum's archive is the original minutes books for the ARG for its entire history. So they do get a bit vague at times, generally when members have been misbehaving over the years, but most of the records are there. Of course, they continued to grow. They acquired this in 1972. They had nowhere to put it, not a hope in hell. But the tail and the wings did actually, and the engines made its way to Moorabbin, but they had no way of moving the fuselage. And hence that's why the aeroplane ended up at Wobby's World. Yeah, because they had no way of moving it. Then I think it was in 1995, old Robin Laurie, who operated Wobby's World, was winding the park down. So we went and recovered the aeroplane and moved it from Springvale to Moorabbin. The interesting thing was that we thought it'd take 2 hours to drive from Springvale. The truckie had hardly even weighed down his tyres. We couldn't keep up with him. He was doing 80, 90K down Springvale Road. Yeah. Again, it's these stories which make it all interesting, of course, the human element and aspect of all this. Again, our focus then, as we basically in the early 80s went from basically gathering any aeroplane which was presented to us to developing what was probably one of the first collection policies. And we decided to focus on Australian designed manufactured aeroplanes, with, of course, our focus being, Fisherman's Bend. And we did manage to acquire a number of airframes. And in the last 10 years, we've basically managed to acquire what was the missing aeroplanes out of our collection. So other than an F-18, I think just about all the production aeroplanes we have copies of now within the collection. Well, that was really Hawkety Haviland. They're one step from the gutter. Anyway, I shouldn't say that. Oh, yeah, but they're one-offs, unfortunately. But we did manage, the CA-31 mock-up, of course. The story behind that, Ian Royal and John Marion, who were 2 CAC employees and ex-presidents of the ARG, basically stole it one afternoon. And it disappeared. It actually went up to storage in a boathouse at Eildon. And a couple of years later, the CAC management decided they'd like to exhibit that. So the thing had to be smuggled back in. After that, then they officially donated to the ARG. So we do have clear title. Again, every aeroplane in the way it's acquired has a story. This aeroplane, of course, most of the Mirages went overseas. The only ones which do manage to survive were the ones which survived as training aids up at Wagga. And number 16, which was a gutted wreck sitting in a yard in Footscray. This aeroplane was, of course, meant to go on the gate alongside the Canberra at Avalon. The apprentices were doing it as a project, but then all the apprentices got sacked, so it got shoved behind a hangar and forgotten about. And the very first Avalon Air Show, we were all allowed in there. People got all excited and everybody started chasing this aeroplane, wanting for their own collection, of course. But our foot in the door was that our patron at the time was Sir Brian Inglis, who was the boss of Astor. And even though the manager at Avalon had told us to get stuff, we couldn't get it. Once the edict came from above that, your boss says give it to them, we ended up getting it. So we managed to move it inside in 1995. So luckily it's been spared from the elements ever since. And as a consequence, hasn't suffered. And probably one of the few Mirages actually still in its original paint. I think most of them now have been repainted in the various museums. So it may be literally one of the few time capsule ones left. And we've got no intentions of repainting it. It's more of a conservation rather than a restoration. Again, the collection also, as well as Australian designed and manufactured, generally focuses on aeroplanes with significant Australian contribution. This aeroplane probably predates that to a certain degree, of course, when basically anything come up with the Department of Supply back then, the museum would have a crack at, and they managed to acquire this aeroplane after it suffered a heavy landing. Yeah, put it back. Suffered a heavy deck landing on the Melbourne and ended up being retired due to overstressing of the airframe. But even then, that was a recovery in its half, breaking down trucks and all sorts of things like that. But ended up at the museum, and again, it suffered badly being outside, being a wooden aeroplane. No, you're right. All right. But it's still their pride of place. Another one, again, filling holes and obscure things within the aviation industry and what they produced. We were donated this by Dyson's. I'm trying to think when now. I think it was early 90s. And we went and picked it up and drove it to the museum. One of the museum members had a bus license. So we basically picked it up. We used to drive it around the airport Saturday nights after barbecues and until we accidentally broke its rear axle one day. So again, and surprising, that's the most popular exhibit at the museum amongst the kids, as you could imagine. Oh, yeah, and this one. It's all a part of history, of course. And again, it's the human element. And as I point out, that thing chased me down Darabin Creek on my motorbike when I was 15. And when the cops finally caught me, I copped a thumping from my father. So again, the human connections to all these aeroplanes are what make the stories interesting. Otherwise, they're lumps of metal. And just about every aeroplane at the ARG, as some of the people here know, I can basically tell you stories about the various human connections. That's what makes them interesting. Yeah. Now, in the last, I've been chair for just over 10 years now. When I took over, the museum was a little bit tired and needed a bit of a reboot. We changed the focus, and this is where marketing, etc., and it's how you have to work out how does an aviation museum become relevant in today's society, of course, and today's society is just weird. Our focus has been families. And so we've focused on the youth, we've focused on young families. And when you look at the museum's price point for interest, we haven't had an entry price increase in almost 30 years. But as a consequence, we're affordable to young families where they're struggling. We also introduced something called an associate membership, which is only half price to our normal membership. But that just basically gives them free access to the museum. No voting rights, no access, restoration or whatever, but just come as many times a year. So as a consequence, I think when we took over in 2013, the museum had about 130 members. I think last figures were about 850. So, and a good portion of those are the associate memberships because the families want to get involved. As a sideline to that, we also started something called the Windjills Youth Group, where basically any kid 10 and above, they can come and get involved. And at the moment, there's around 70 odd kids in that youth group, and around 20 to 30 attend every Saturday. And even some of the parents now come and attend, and there's a bit of a syllabus. They make models. Some of the ones as they get older, 15, 16, they come and start lending a hand on some of the aircraft restorations. There's quite a number of them who have actually gone off into apprenticeships within the industry. A couple of them have actually entered the RAF as aircrew and as tradies, as well as a number of them have gone on to commence commercial pilots licenses. So, that process is working well. And a number of the kids are actually now in their early 20s and they're still actively involved at the museum. So this is a point of how do you make the place relevant? How do you make the place survive? And how do you create future generations for people to actually come and engage in this? Because in most of these societies and organizations, it's an aging population. I started at the museum at 14. As I think the little blurb said, I've been there for 44 years, and none of the people who were there when I was involved as teenagers is there currently today. There's a lot of people who were there before me are still there. So, it's just a way of making the museum relevant. And also bear in mind too, we don't get any significant government funding, and our gate takings are what funds the entire museum. The museum now has a staff of about 8 part-time staff. We operate on a 7-day-a-week operation. And we generally get, I think our last numbers were well in excess of 75,000 a year visitation. And actually we weren't including the school tours and the kids in that last. So we're probably around 100,000 visitors a year at the moment. So the museum's tracking well. All right, what are you clicking on next?
Now we're going to the other report.
All right, the future? Okay.
Just while that's happening, actually, very quickly.
Yep.
Any reason why the tail feathers have never been added to the Viscount?
I don't know, actually. They do need work. And I think that was a fact that there's major attachments and things which need to be remachined. And back when the aeroplane came back in 95, machining a new fin attachment would have been a major undertaking for the museum. Nowadays, not so much. The technology we have available for us today is just absolutely amazing, and it's making our restoration so easy. We just draw something up, we plastic print it, we see if it fits, and if it fits, we go machine up the component. The things we're doing today, I couldn't have dreamed of when we were basically kids paint stripping sides of aeroplanes down at the museum and slopping a bit of paint on them.
I think that's the only intact Viscount in the world.
No, there's a lot of Viscounts on display around the world. In Australia, yes. Yeah. The only other one is the one up at I can't remember. Well, it was at Toowoomba Airport for years. The fuselage. It was Les Arthur's old one, and that's been moved out somewhere. It's been turned into a B&B, and they've got some like replica wings on it. Yeah. Well, they were cut off in the end, but we put them back on. Yeah.
Just be that race against time before it rots. Even now, we do all the restoration work outside, preservation, and that. As soon as you finish, it's like the Sydney Harbour Bridge. You go back and start all over again.
Yeah. So the only aeroplanes which are outside are the ones which we literally can't squeeze into any of the buildings at the moment. So other than that, there's a lot of aeroplanes we probably could assemble and have outside, but we choose not to because we want to keep them inside. The Nomad, for instance, it's still in good weather. So these aeroplanes do come out for special events, of course. All right. Now this one, what we're going to show you some of is there's a museums or Association of Aviation Museums. So this was a report we presented to them last, was it October, November? November. And this is basically where we're sitting at the moment with the museum and the museum's future. So for the last 3 years, one of the biggest issues for a long time at the museum is being able to plan for the future because lack of tenure. And the airports were privatised in the late 90s. I think the museum was identified as a significant asset to Moorabbin Airport in the early 2000s, but they literally could not decide where they wanted to put us. As every master plan, they redesigned the airport in various shapes and forms. But as part of the master plans to the government, they do have a community commitment where they have to allocate so much space for community use as part of the federal lease agreements. I think we'd been offered around 5 different sites around the airport over the years, and probably beneficial to us, the very last master plan, the Goodmans, the airport operators, had been chomping into the aviation precinct rather heavily. And the next proposed section, they would have removed almost 30% of the airport's tarmac areas and maintenance facilities had the master plan been approved. This was the first master plan, well, one of 2 actually, which had been rejected. Normally they'd get half a dozen people whinging about the aeroplane noise, etc. This one had over 400 applications put in against the redevelopment, and the minister knocked it on its head. But part of that, Goodmans realised that they hadn't acted on various previous master plans, and one of the commitments was the location of the museum. So they decided they'd better tick that off as before they submitted their master plan. So we signed a 10-year lease, which is the longest which Goodman's will issue as a lease. But also it's the current site, and it's this, for those familiar with Moorabbin, it's directly across the road, which was the old CASA admin building, and we've been allocated that site there. So across the road, we have 2,500 square meters allocated. And on the existing site, it's literally 4,000 square meters. And that is part of their now official community engagement, and it's being given to the ARG for $1 a year for the next 10 years. So as a consequence, we're able to finally start making permanent plans. And for the last 3 years, Ewan and I have been working in the background. We've designed, it'll be a multi-site museum, unfortunately. Would be good, but anyway. So on the existing, on the new site, do you have a slide for that, Ewan?
Yeah, it's right at the end.
No, have you? All right, well, I'll talk about it. There's a 2,500 metre building about to be built, or hoping to be built. You can't scroll up.
No. Doesn't work like that. It's very unforgiving.
All right. Anyway, the 2,500 square metre building across the road will actually hold the civilian aspect of the Moorabbin Museum. And even though, you know, you could say there's sexy aeroplanes in the RAF Museum, War Memorial, etc., I believe that the ARG has the most balanced collection across all of Australian aviation in the country. From the balance of aeroplanes we've got from the 20s, the 30s, all the way through to current. So I believe that when this facility is built, we will have the best, most diverse and balanced aviation collection in the country, covering civilian and military aeroplanes. So the 2,500 square metre building across the road will house every civilian aeroplane, and that includes the Viscount, the freighter, the DC-2, all the aeroplanes which are currently outside, and the one stuck in my hangar too, the DC-3. Now,
it's on loan everywhere else.
yes, yes. And also the new site. So the plan is currently, once a 2,500 square metre building, everything on the current site will morph across for the time being. And then a 4,000 square metre building will be built on the existing site, and that will house the military collection, which is still the largest bulk of what the ARG has within their collection. And at that time, we're hoping to place aeroplanes like the Kitty Hawk and the Beaufort on display, which have not been on display. Well, the Beaufort never, and the Kitty Hawk not since it was the old Kitty Stang. We used to throttle bash it as kids.
Let's just talk about that for a second whilst that's our visitor increase.
All right. Well, we've had substantial growth, and actually most of the museums around the country, Queensland Museum too, because I'm a member there actually, they've all bounced back rather strongly after COVID, which is positive. I often joke that, you know, when Geoffrey Kennett rolled the arts in with the museums, I thought it was a poor choice, but he was the arts minister and everything at the time. They tend to get the funding, and of course the technology museums are like the red-headed cousin you lock in the basement at family reunions. We're often overlooked. And recently we had the tourism minister actually visit the museum for the first time during, no, that's the wrong one.
Oh, no.
During the open cockpit weekend. And he did point out to me, because I was complaining, that as he would only been in the job for a few weeks, he could see the great disparity where a great deal of money tends to go out to the regional museums. You know, literally millions of dollars gets thrown at them. Other than that, the rest of the money goes into the CBD. So the southeastern suburbs and the various heritage organisations, you know, we just get overlooked. And he did promise me that he was going to address that. So hopefully the plan we have before tourism at the moment will get ticked off very shortly, and this will become something of reality. All right. Well, that one's probably relevant to the historical society. Almost said historical society, of course. And this has come to the museum. I think this is actually, and bear in mind, I've grown up around Hopton and Meggs and everybody. This is the most comprehensive aviation library I've ever seen in my life. Because of Joe. Joe, who has been friends with Richard for 40 odd years. This is a bit of a tale of woe, this one. Richard was starting to get concerned. He's starting to have failing health. I think it must have been 6 or 7 years ago. I went up and met him. It was, yeah, it was before COVID. Yeah. So I went up and met Richard, had a good talk to him, and he was really concerned. And I promised him that if his collection was bequeathed to the ARG, we would keep it together as a collection, and we would certainly honour that. During COVID, unfortunately, this is a story of things I do for the ARG. Richard came down with a very form of aggressive dementia, and it literally took hold within months. It was that aggressive. He was found wandering near Archerfield Airport 11:30 at night, not knowing who he was. They basically grabbed him. They locked him up in the QE2 hospital up there in the dementia ward, and from there he just degraded. The family, well, not the family, sorry, the neighbours were concerned. The neighbours had keys. They used to look after him, help him out. They went into his house, found a pile of letters, and literally on the top of the pile of letters was letters from Joe, myself. So they basically rang us and contacted us, and I was in Queensland a lot, so I went over there. Got in touch with his family, who was a twin sister in the US. And I don't know how to this day, but I ended up as his guardian. Went to court, ended up as his guardian. And I can tell you that the Australian medical system is buggered. It took me 40 applications to get him into a dementia home and out of the ward. I was panicking, of course, as you could imagine, because they're telling me that they weren't going to fund him in the hospital anymore and they're going to turn him out onto the street. I managed to get him into a facility on probation. And within 2 days of him being there, he's punching on with a Croatian lady 2 doors down. But it was okay because she started it. Unfortunately, his dementia and degradation was that rapid. Within 2 weeks of getting him into the home, he basically stopped eating, couldn't walk. And I think another 2 weeks after that, he passed away. And from that, then all of a sudden I was dealing with the funeral. I spoke with the family, and of course, because he has no next of kin out here and literally had nobody, I suggested that we have him cremated and that I would spread his ashes from one of my aeroplanes. And he was a nature lover and a nature walker, so I basically took his ashes and spread them over French Island, over the wilderness area on French Island. In the meantime, of course, the state trustees were appointed as he's in charge of his finances, which I didn't want anything to do with. And they were going to basically move skips in and throw all this stuff into the bin. So I started acting. His sister sent letters across relatively quickly. She signed donation forms because we never, even though we had letters back and forward from Richard, we never had a commitment. And from there, the state trustees have basically left me alone. So far, we have moved to Moorabbin 20 tonne of books. Now, to give you an idea of this collection, yeah, no, that's just one of the rooms. That's one room. That's a fisheye view. There was goat trails through this house. It was a small 3-bedroom house. I lost count of, I think, 73 filing cabinets. Yeah, well, probably is. Yeah, I couldn't count that high because I'm blonde. And the back veranda, and there was 15 or 18 filing cabinets on his front porch. He couldn't even get to his front door. Anyway, we've just, the most recent load was 100 boxes of books, which have just arrived in there at Moorabbin now. We still have about 30 boxes to go. Just the collection is amazing. To give you an idea, the wall on the Concord, which I think was to the right of this, started off with pre-development project plans, drawings, everything. His connections were amazing because he did work at BA on the TRS-2 and the Concorde. His favourite aeroplane was the VC-10. And this Concorde went through everything to even a full set of maintenance manuals being in his collection, right through to the post-crash reports. And that's how thorough his collection was. And literally every aspect of anything aviation you could think of, you go into Richard's house and you could find, literally go to woe. And that's what I mean when I said that this is the most comprehensive collection I've ever seen in my life. And luckily, it's all been saved. And I can't tell you how bad my back was hurting after loading. Yeah, unfortunately, he wanted the collection kept as a collection, and the various other organisations which were offered to at the time, yeah, couldn't guarantee that, where I gave him the personal commitment that we would actually honour that. He also collected a lot because he worked in Africa as a layman, an engineer. He also worked up in Indonesia and through Papua New Guinea. So he collected a great deal of pottery and art from those places too, where I've managed to find homes for a good portion of that. But a number of those items are actually going to be coming to the museum. And when we do build the new archive facility at the museum, the reading and research room actually will be named the Richard Sanders Research Centre as a mark of respect for the donation which he made to the museum. So that's basically it for Richard Sanders. But he was a fantastic fellow. He did manage to escape from the dementia ward 3 times and did manage to get out a window and onto the scaffolding, and he was telling the builders off that they were doing something wrong. But, you know, when he's sitting there, and some days he was pretty compass, and he's telling you how, you know, Barnes Wallace was one of his lecturers when he was an apprentice at Brooklands. You know, it's pretty amazing, these stories like that from, unfortunately, he's now gone. Yes, yeah, well, he was lecturing, yeah. Yes, Mark?
Actually, didn't get a chance to do an oral history.
No, unfortunately, because I met him prior, and then the dementia came in, and I'd get these snippets out of him on some days. You know, as you know, people with dementia, they can remember something from 20, 30 years ago like that, but they can't remember your name. And each time I went up, whenever I was in Queensland, which was generally twice a month, I'd visit him every second day. By the second, he could remember who Ashley was, but he couldn't remember my face. But by the second or third visit, he would recognise my face again. But by the time you then cycled through again, 2 weeks later, he told me once that as a kid, he used to watch the high-speed Meteor doing its runs over the bay off the side where he lived. They'd sit there, and that's what inspired him to get involved in aviation, watching this yellow Meteor zip up and down the coast. So, yeah, unfortunately, yeah, again, look, there's a great many members here who are no longer here. Their knowledge bases and what's, you know, passed on with them, of course. The funny note, though, I couldn't work out how to get his ashes back to Melbourne. So during the one of the truckloads, I brought down a fridge for my daughter because it was, you know, empty. I had to empty the whole house. So he came down in the crisper. I'm sure he wouldn't have minded. He would have had a laugh out of that, actually. Yeah. All right. Well, that's the artist rendition of what the museum will be. As you can see, military museum to one side, aviation museum. How we're going to get the customers from A to B without killing them across 2nd Avenue remains to be seen. But we did ask about an overhead, and apparently that just starts costing millions and millions, of course.
5 or 6 million minimum for a basic.
And then a walk-through tunnel. No, there's actually a water basin 8 foot down under the museum. There's 2 levels. Of course, one of our members is an avid modeler, Andre, and through a lot of chasing through the internet, eBay, and I think even some of those came from Dave Anderson's son, the old frog kits. Yeah. I bought a couple off him. We've managed to get a pretty good rendition to scale of what the 2 museums will be. And yes, the intention is that hopefully when the military section forms, that the Lincoln will be there ready to go together. The boys are actually going to start work on it as soon as they finish the prototype Heron. They're going to start working on the Lincoln in sub-assemblies. So,
is there room for expansion?
After this, there will be at some stage, because the NDB towers, which they use for commercial training, they have to keep, they've decommissioned most of them around the country, but I think Jandakot and Moorabbin is still active. I think there might be one other. And of course, that's still part of the commercial syllabus, being able to do NDB letdowns. So they've got to keep it there. But as soon as that's gone, I'm hoping that we'll be able to take the land behind the current museum site, and hopefully, well, the current chairman of the airport, or the CEO of the airport, he's very supportive of the museum. We've been very lucky to have him there. He's a very strong supporter. Even so, as part of the museum modernisation, we actually formed, there's now an Australian Aircraft Restoration Group Heritage Trust. And where in the past various things have happened, not in the best interest of the ARG, now all the assets, all the major assets of the ARG have been morphed across into this heritage trust. There's 5 trustees. 3 are actually ARG members. Well, actually, they're all ARG members, as it turns out, but 3 were ARG members, which is basically made up of the ARG executive, chairman, vice chairman, and treasurer. The 3 non-ARG members actually comprise, even though they're members, David Crotty, who those who may be aware of him. Again, he was one of the kids who grew up at Moorabbin, but a vast heritage background, assistant technical curator at the War Memorial for many years. He was recently the consultant on the Vimy relocation and conservation. He's a curator of the Qantas Museum at Mascot, and he also consults at the Museum of Victoria. So you can understand what he brings to the table is beneficial to the trust. The second trustee of the second group is Nicole Thomas, who is the custodian of the Camden Museum. And of course, Nicole's background is heritage and conservation. So again, we have 2 of those. And the third person is actually Paul Ferguson, who is the current Moorabbin Air Museum CEO. Again, I thought having somebody from the Moorabbin Airport. Yeah, did I say Moorabbin Airport? Oh, sorry. And also his background is he's a corporate lawyer. So being able to get a free lawyer on call has been very beneficial at times. So they're the ones who actually make up the Heritage Trust. So now basically if the museum wishes to dispose of anything for any reason, they've got to state their reason. The board makes a presentation to the trust, and the trust will make a ruling on it. So we've looked at this many times over the years, but unfortunately it's been stopped and started that many times. It just never got over the line, and at last we've managed to do it. There was a constitution change a number of years ago which offered a layer of protection, but it was still open to basically abuse. So this basically locks up and protects the ARG's collection now against any, hopefully never, but future mismanagement, etc. And that's about it, where the museum sits currently. Yes, any questions?
Storage.
There's storage and restoration areas for the future.
Well, they'll be included literally on the existing site from, if you're aware of the site, from the Casey hangar to literally that whole area will be a standalone storage and restoration facility down track. But we thought we were really edging what we're asking the government support and help the development. So we thought we better not be too greedy. At this, the archive was an 11th hour squeeze in the side as well. Initially, we were just asking for the buildings to get the airplanes under cover, but various archival collections came in during this period, so we decided to push it out for the archive building as well. So there is a plan for that down track. Yeah.
Joe Vella.
Any way or any thoughts of getting the CAC AA 107 mock-up from Ballarat Air Museum for a swap? Something that you haven't got?
Well, it's interesting because many years ago that actually was owned by the ARG.
I know.
And they gave it to the Wilson family in exchange for storing the Desuda and the Swallow up at their facility at Wandon, as well as all the museum's Wirraway spares.
Oh, really?
So then Nelson loaned it down to the Ballarat Museum, which he later donated to them. So
it's a donation. It's not a loan anymore.
No, it was donated. Yeah.
Well, that's the missing piece from CAC.
Yeah. So,
Sad.
well, time will tell. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
The Ballarat Museum, there's a pretty good group of guys there operating it.
Undercover.
Yeah, it's undercover.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
Oh, we've got Noel Jackling.
Yes.
Can you tell us, please, about the acquisition of the DC2?
Well, the DC2 was actually more Mark could fill you in on that, because Mark actually did all the work, because there was a great deal of title disputes, probably the polite way to put it, because those who knew Jack McDonald, he's a great bloke, but he's a bit of a rogue. And he promised anybody who came and worked on it and contributed something, he gave them part ownership. So was it 30 people you had to work through, Mark?
Look, we approached Jack, and Jack was very supportive of it coming to the museum, but Jack then pointed out that he promised so many other people a share for helping work on it. So we first had to create a document that everyone else thought had a share agreed yes. So there were really 3 shares. Jack had 1 share, someone else had 1 share, and then the 3rd share went 8 ways. So you sort of take a 3rd share divided by 8. So that's a 24th share that each of those people had. We had to create a document that all of these people agreed, they did have a share, and they agreed their share was only this big, and that they were in share with all these other people. Then we had to get each of them to agree to donate it to the museum. So this was donated under a specific government grant that gave them all a tax deductibility. So we had to get it valued by Bob Eastgate at the time, and I can't recall the other valuer. So it was a very extended process to go through, but it's a great aircraft to have in the collection. It's not Australian made, but the civil collection that the ARG has, even though this is an Air Force history in Australia, the DC-2 is a very important civil airliner. And the ARG's example is the 3rd oldest survivor, but it's actually the oldest survivor with the skinny and original shark fin and the passenger door. The other 2 RAF examples, which are older than it by a fraction, both had converted cargo doors fitted during World War II. So it's quite unique worldwide, and there's only 8 surviving. So we're very lucky to have it and the other 2 DC-2s in Australia.
From Jack Davidson, which was Jack was Sid Marshall's partner. Yeah, so most of the stuff, well, that I think was stored at Camden at the side of Harold Nallen's building for a period.
The Albury one. No.
Yes,
Yes, I was sort of half aware of that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they started restoring it to fly. You may recall it was actually on display at the Aviation Expo at Tullamarine in 1984 when the original Comet was brought out, and various people here were involved in that.
Jack Gillies and Jack McDonald were involved in it at Eston, and I got very heavily involved with them when I was chasing parts for A65 111.
Yeah.
But just a bit more about, you might not know this, with A30-9. When I was working at CAC, a visitor came to CAC and I was allocated to that person, and it was Harold Thomas coming to CAC looking to get parts for a windshield. And so I had to take him to various places within CAC and answer his questions. And that night I said, well, where are you going to eat? He said, well, I haven't made any plans. So I rang Flo and I said, listen, Flo, I'm going to bring this stranger home. Can we knock something together? So we went home to our place, and I had the cockpit being worked on at that stage. It was a lot of work to do then. Anyway, we had a very amicable evening, dinner, and we got talking. And the A30-9 was on his property at Moorabbin. And quite seriously, looking directly in the eye, he said, David, you can have that aeroplane now, as long as you come and take it away. I said, what am I going to do with that? I'm lucky to have a cockpit. So it was offered to me, and he wasn't in jest. I think he just wanted to get rid of it. And at that stage, I was a likely candidate because I had to refuse. But that's just another piece of the history that you might not be aware of.
No, I was aware that it was there at Moorabbin with Harold Nallen. Yeah, I'd had that conversation with them. But unfortunately, they were trying to get it flying in time for the 50th anniversary, which they didn't. And then they discovered that there was some exfoliation in the spark caps. And again, nowadays, that wouldn't be an issue for us. But back then, the cost of redoing the spark caps and everything was prohibitive. And unfortunately, the aeroplane was grounded. The aeroplane then went down to Judy Pay with the possibility of her taking on the restoration. And there was a really big storm which went through Tyab. This microcell went through, and nobody thought that there was really a need to tie it down because they thought it was a big aeroplane. Well, the aeroplane got swung around and it picked up a friend of mine's 182 and dumped it upside down onto an Oster. And so hence that was all the damage done in the rear. So after that, it ended up probably most of you have seen it sitting in the paddocks down at Tide for many, many years before Mark did the groundwork and actually got it to Moorabbin.
And at that stage, no one owned it. Like when there was someone wanting his.
Oh, when the insurance company said, who's going to pay for the damage? Nobody owned it.
No one paid for it.
Yeah, very true.
Ashley,
Yes.
David Knight here. When's all this, when are they going to build these hangars? Is there a timeline?
The new
on-
facility. Well,
Yeah.
at the moment, like I said, we had to do a business plan, present it to the government, show them that this whole project is viable when we're seeking funding. And they've had that report for 9 months, I believe, and 3 of their senior staffers were working through it, and they've ticked it all off. And as far as we know, it's sitting on the minister's desk, ready for a green tick or a red tick, or Red Cross rather. So we'll wait and see. If he wants us to vote for him next year, he better put the green tick.
Bravo. Yeah, we'll back you up on that.
Mm.
Okay.
So we're hoping we may get there might be a public announcement within the next couple of months. Yeah. Yes, Mark?
Ash,
As you pointed out, the ARG started with an aeroplane with nowhere to put it and continues even through the Viscount to bite off aeroplanes that it can't put anywhere.
Mm.
Is there anything on the horizon that you've got your eye on without giving away?
Yes.
know,
Another big aeroplane.
Yep. So you've got another thing in the sights.
Yes.
Still,
yes.
again, with no place to put it.
Again, nowhere to put it.
Yep.
Yeah,
So,
but we're stupid.
but keeping up the tradition. So good to see.
Oh,
it.
yeah, absolutely.
Congratulations. Excellent.
Yeah, no, not quite that big, but no, we do have one. Yes. And that'll be announced very shortly.
Ashley, Richard Honus from
Yeah.
Melbourne. In your model of the defence aircraft, there appears to be a Lancaster. Could you talk about that, please?
It's actually not a Lancaster, it's a Lincoln. And again, a number of years ago, through Mark Pilkington's work, so I don't know whether to hate him or love him, he acquired the ex-Southend Lincoln. So it's actually a British-built Lincoln, but it's the only Lincoln which we ever had a chance of getting, seeing that there's only 4 survivors in the world, 2 in Argentina, 1's at Cosford in England, and this was the only one which was ever going to be available and to fill a hole within the collection. So through Mark's good work, we basically managed to acquire all the major portions. It is lacking a cockpit, but we'll work out that when we get to it.
Bob Livingston had a question.
Yes, Bob.
Well, not so much a question, but comments, basically. Thank you, Ashley, for your humour that we went through there. And as currently the president of the Queensland branch, and also as a foundation member of QAM, and also being an ex-member of MAM, Moorabbin Air Museum as it was, and I got my little badge still somewhere all those years ago. I'll quickly have a call out to Richard Hades, because thank you for your attempt at my quiz. Don't feel disappointed. Only 3 other people have got it right, and I'm very disappointed at that. Richard's library is something obviously that we had a lot to do with up here in Queensland, and we are very, very, very pleased that it's found a home, because it eluded us completely. Richard's beginnings of his dementia up as a member of QA of the Queensland branch, and eventually we had to dispense with his membership because it became, I'll use the word unruly, and I won't go beyond that. And I'm sure you'll understand, Ashley, because you dealt with him later. We had to remove him from the membership because he was creating too many problems. But we in Queensland were very, very much aware of what the museum was like. His library was like. We all trooped down there on location, and I've certainly been there on others. And it is an amazing reservoir of aviation history, and it would have been the most frightening thing to have lost that. So thank you very much for picking the ball up there and running with that. And that'll do me.
No worries. Thanks, Bob. I don't think my back agrees with you, but no, it's well worth it. And yes, Richard was very eccentric and very eclectic. And I guess nowadays, of course, if you sat somebody down, mind you, we like to think we're all normal, you would probably find that he was autistic. And I think that's a fair assumption. High functioning autistic person. Going through some of his personal.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, going through his personal notes and even some of his personal papers and his exams, he basically scored in the high 90s on literally every aviation licensing exam as he extended his license coverage, etc., as an engineer. So it gives you a level of, he highly intelligent, but from an interaction point of view with human beings, he struggled. He did. Yeah, true. Yeah. But we all like to think we're normal. That's what the free
and I
voice
think he
in my
must have
head
had
keeps telling me. Except for the one says kill yous all. But no, anyway. No, yeah.
I think he must have had an incredible ability to remember things as well.
Yeah. Well, prior to his dementia, of course, yeah, he didn't have a computer, of course. It was all in his head. And he didn't have a phone. He was old school. Everything had to be, stamp and letter. So it was awkward dealing with him. But in the end, a good outcome.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it. No worries. Thank you for having me. I hope I haven't bored you too much.
Can I get a photograph?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
For start, Ashley, thank you very much for coming in tonight. And you have a very good way of presenting. I've seen a few presenters here over the years, and I enjoyed the way you presented tonight, and giving us a bit of background to the museum, past, present, and future, of course. And as you have rightly said, I'm probably going to meet my maker before you, so we'll just see what happens. I hope there's no Mack trucks on the way home.
Probably jinxed myself.
All right, look, good to have you all here tonight. Most welcome, and good to have Bob Livingston, of course, making some astute comments from interstate. And I noticed on the far side there, at one time we had Gil Johnson, and Gil is all the way in, believe it or not, Devon in the UK. And Gil's been a member of the museum in the past, and I think I saw him about a year or two ago, Neil, a couple of years back. And I went to school with Gil Johnson way back when, and there was another fellow there by the name of Ross Williamson, and we were the Three Musketeers. Come interval time, instead of being out there playing cricket or baseball or something else, we were discussing the merits of twin ignition and carburetors as well. So good to see him in the collection here tonight. And I hope he was suitably enthralled with what we've had. And I can't quite see him. There he is. That's him. Yep. Gil, good to have you here. All right. We'll wrap it up tonight. And gentlemen, we've got a cup of tea and scone over here, or biscuits, should I say. Once again, good to have you here. And I hope you've enjoyed the presentation by Ashley, giving a bit of insight into the museum. And as he said, there's every story, there's a story behind that as well. And we could be here all night with the small details, but we won't be. So once again, thank you very much for being here, and look forward to seeing you either at the Thai Bear Show or alternatively at the next meeting we have next month. That's it.